All right, now welcome to Crow 777 Radio. This is hour one of episode 660. Jason Finger is with me, and Jerry Marzinsky, who I'm very excited to have on, is with us for the first time. Welcome, Jason.
And a very fine good afternoon.
Jerry, I'm going to have Jason do an intro so people know who you are, but can you tell folks where they can find you, website, whatever you want to lay down?
Yeah, my website is jerrymarzinsky.com. You can reach me through that. There's scores of videos there that I've done on this very subject.
All right, Jason, why don't you go ahead and do the intro so people know something about who we're speaking with?
And that's Jerry, Jerry, Marzinsky, Marzinsky. Jerry is a retired licensed psychotherapist with over 35 years of experience working with and studying the thought processes and the voices heard by psychotic and criminally insane patients, some of the most volatile psychiatric institutions in the nation. He was awarded the state of Arizona's Meritorious Service Award while working in the psychology department of a large state prison. He was also awarded the Pima College's Apple Award for the teaching of abnormal psychology. Jerry has held the position of second lieutenant in the Arizona Civil Air Patrol and is a licensed commercial pilot, a certified scuba diver, and a long-distance motorcycle rider. He also served as an assistant scoutmaster. His formal academic training comprises a BA in psychology from Temple University, a master's degree in counseling from the University of Georgia, and 2 years of study in a PhD psychology program. He is co-author of An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower.
All right, so if you weren't able to deduce, one of the main things we're going to talk about is basically schizophrenia. And what Jerry has done here is not accepted by the mainstream by any stretch of the imagination. And he has also experienced censorship on the platforms that do censor. But anyhow, welcome, Jerry. It's a pleasure to have you.
That's good to be with you guys.
So where's a good place to pick up here? Do you have a preference?
Well, I'd be glad to answer any questions you have. I have my standard story that I historically talk about, which are in all these different ones. It's the same story over and over again.
Well, let me just kick it off with the overarching statement here. What you've determined is that schizophrenia is not hallucinations. It is not imbalanced brain chemistries or the other things that most of us are told they are. And you know this from years of firsthand observation to the point where many of the patterns you've detected are predictable. And you've also found ways to kind of short circuit, for lack of better terms, the voices in heads. Is that a good place to start?
Well, that's a good place to start. You look at what the psychiatric mafia is doing. They pull in the patient. They say, your brain is broken. You've got schizophrenia. There is no cure. All you can do is take these toxic psychiatric meds we have. And they say it's due to a chemical brain imbalance. So one of the first things I saw when I went to work at, it's probably the biggest psychiatric hospital on the planet at the time, Milledgeville State Hospital in Georgia. It's been around since before the Civil War. There were 10,000 patients there when I got there. Nothing in the educational system prepared me for this place or for any of this other stuff. I mean, it was like, whoa. It's like jumping into the sea of insanity. Every mental illness known to man was there.
What year was this, Jerry?
This was in the 70s. It was late 70s. I worked there for 7 years.
Was it kind of like a ward, like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest kind of thing?
Well, some of it was. I worked at different places within that institution, but I was assigned to a psychiatric building. So there were 200 buildings in this place. It sprawled over well over 1,000 acres. And it was the size of a small town. And it was in central Georgia. There wasn't anything else around at the time. They had one mom and pop restaurant. There was no McDonald's. There were no Walmarts. There were no nothing. It was pretty well developed. So they had staff dormitories there. Back then I was single and the cost was $15 a month with maid service, heating and cooling provided, because they had a hard time getting people working in the middle of nowhere. This place was 30 miles to Macon where you could get a McDonald's. There was nothing around this place. So we had staff dorms, we had the central kitchen. And when I first got there, nobody was interested in what these voices were that the schizophrenic patients were reportedly hearing. And I could watch their behavior, and it was clear that if they were listening to these voices, they were getting in all kinds of trouble. So I thought there was some kind of correlation between these voices and the amount of trouble they got into. So I started looking at that, and there was a pattern. It was a pretty consistent pattern. The more control these voices had, the stronger they were, the more trouble these people got into. And I had no idea what these things were, because in college, they taught us, well, these things are auditory hallucinations due to a chemical brain imbalance. So I'm like, well, auditory hallucinations. So I went, okay, what are they saying? Nobody knew. Everybody believed they were auditory hallucinations because that's what you were brainwashed to think when you went through college.
In other words, the victim of the malady is producing these voices by their own cognition.
Well, due to some kind of mysterious chemical brain imbalance that they had.
Never been measured, though.
Never been measured. Matter of fact, the truth of the matter is it was made up by the drug company Eli Lilly back in the 70s when they came out with Prozac. They needed some way to explain why their drug worked. So they made one up. They didn't have one. What Prozac did was it was a MAO inhibitor. So what happens is after the neuron fires, it gets rid of those neurotransmitters, those chemical neurotransmitters. It breaks them down. What Prozac did is it prevented breakdown, so they would keep re-triggering that nerve over and over and over again. There would be more neurotransmitter there to trigger the nerve. It didn't work that well. Most of those antidepressants didn't work too much better than placebo.
And what was the percentage of schizophrenia out of all the maladies people were experiencing?
It's increasing. I have those statistics somewhere. It was like 25 million worldwide, if I remember correctly.
Now, currently?
Yeah, currently, and increasing. So nobody's getting any better. The world isn't getting any better.
Are you aware of any pharmaceuticals that have any kind of a positive effect on schizophrenia?
Well, they do have an effect. What they are is they're major tranquilizers. So they calm the person down. Now, these voices, they want the person hyped up. They want him feeling negative, angry, paranoid. They don't call paranoid schizophrenia for nothing. What they basically are is the description, like the Gnostics say, that they're archons. All right? They want the person upset. They feed off of the negative emotion that is generated by these thoughts. And they insert those thoughts into the minds of their victims.
Is it 100% negative with schizophrenic patients?
Almost. And if it's positive, it's just to get their trust so they can move further in.
So what you're saying there is there's actually some kind of a consciousness that actively works to gain trust, then it can flip the switch and get into the negativity vein.
Well, that's one of the ways it does it, especially with people who are using Ouija boards. You know, they come across as, hey, we're a beneficial spirit and we can help you and we know all this stuff. So once they get the trust, then they turn on them and stab them in the back. But it doesn't take trust for them to get in there. They get in by several different ways. Methamphetamine is one of the biggest ways. It opens up the spiritual protection somehow, and they just move right in. Methamphetamine is, I've seen more people go insane, psychotic on methamphetamine than any other drug that I know of.
I grew up where methamphetamine hit the world. The Hells Angels brought it through East County of San Diego, and my entire social culture was ground zero for the introduction of methamphetamine. I know a lot about it, and the one thing I can tell you is it's evil.
Yes, it is.
For whatever reason, it is a direct pipeline to darkness.
Yes.
And, well, I guess I don't want to turn off too much here, but you started to investigate. You discovered that it's almost always negative or headed in that way. It's anti-religious. It fosters and creates a relationship, or tries to begin implementing negative emotion. It energetically drains victims. The voices get louder after the sun goes down. If they try to ignore the voices, which I understand there are some doctors telling patients to ignore the voices.
Oh, yeah, that's common.
Yeah, the voices get louder. The voices foster self-destructive behavior and isolation, and they demand the attention of the victims. They maneuver for increased control over the victims. They're capable of gaslighting. They can manipulate perception. They have access to all of the victim's experiences and memories. And they do things like demand that the victim doesn't tell others about their presence. And I think I'm going to cut right there, but let's start at the top here. When was it that you began to realize that the very same things were being said across many patients?
Well, there was a point where nobody seemed to know anything about these voices. Now, the other thing I want to make clear to your listeners that they don't just hit schizophrenics. They hit us all. Virtually every negative thought that goes through your mind is installed there by them. Neither the psychiatric mafia nor psychology nor any social science has studied thought. Where do they come from? Nobody thinks about that. Nobody's ever found a thought in a person's brain. So the brain is like a radio. I mean, it picks up signals that are coming in from outside of it. And that's what thoughts do. They're coming in from outside of the brain, mind. So these thoughts that are coming into the schizophrenic's mind do not belong to them. And a lot of the thoughts that are coming into everybody's mind do not belong to them. So from the time you're born, you just figure, hey, these thoughts are mine because I experience them in my head. So who else could they be? Who else's could they be if they're not mine? That's wrong. That's bad wrong. Those thoughts are coming in from somewhere else. So it's like a radio. You tune the radio to a certain station. Schizophrenics are tuned to a very low frequency station. And if you try to turn that frequency up, the entities turn it back down again. They don't want schizophrenics moving out from away from that frequency. So that was one of the first things I noticed is nobody knew exactly what these voices were telling these patients. Everybody was brainwashed with the idea of there being hallucinations. I mean, that's what's taught in the medical schools. That's what's taught in psychology. That's what's taught in all the universities. That's what the psychiatric mafia is backing. That's what Big Pharma is backing. But it's not true. First time I noticed it was when I started watching some of these psychotic patients carrying on conversations with their voices. And those conversations were not word salad. That's the impression you're left with when it's repeated over and over in graduate school that these things are hallucinations. You think, okay, if they're hallucinations, they're all over the place. They're like word salad. They're not going to make any sense. These guys are just totally out of it. That's not what I saw. They were carrying on perfectly logical conversations with somebody or something that I couldn't see. And these were logical conversations. It was like listening to somebody talking on the phone where you could hear what they're saying, but you couldn't hear who they were talking to.
Was there any consistency of what they were discussing from patient to patient?
Yes, it's all negative stuff. That was the consistency. So first was figuring out what these things were saying. And it took me about a year or 2 years to finally get to the point where I could learn to speak with them because they considered psychology and psychiatry enemies. They didn't want the patients talking about them, and they would punish them if they talked about them, about what they were saying. So they'd go into the psychiatrist and they'd say, I'm hearing voices, and he'd drug them silly. And then if they came back again and say, I'm still hearing voices, he'd drug them more until they were just zombies. They still heard the voices, but they weren't as loud. The medications did not get rid of them. They just kind of lowered the volume and turned a person into a zombie in the meantime. So psychologists and psychiatrists were the enemy because what we do is, as far as what I was doing, is I would keep an eye on the entire building. And if one of the psychotics were getting out of line, I'd have to turn them into psychiatry, and psychiatry would drug them. So they didn't trust us or psychiatry. They didn't like the side effects of those drugs. They were absolutely horrible. So they would lie to psychiatry a lot. And when the psychiatrists saw them, they only saw them for like 15 minutes a month. And they'd lie to the psychiatrist. If he said, you still hearing voices? They go, oh, yeah, I'm still hearing them, but they're not bad now. Or, no, I'm not. They'd completely lie to him because they saw what happened. They didn't want to be drugged worse than they were. So it took me about a year or more to learn how to speak with these guys and get little tidbits of information about the voices. So each tidbit I had on the next patient, the next schizophrenic patient I had, I would say, okay, I know this much about the voices. Can you tell me any more? So it took a long time to get a handful of information about the voices. And one of the first tidbits of that information were that they were consistently derogatory, insulting, abusive, and destructive. That was their MO. They were always, always negative. There wasn't anything positive. And if it was just to get their trust, and then they'd stab them in the back later. So I got to thinking, I go, well, why are they consistently negative? What holds them on a consistently negative pattern? Now, this is something psychiatry and psychology can look into themselves. It's right in their face. It's right in their friggin' face. All they got to do is ask some questions. Are the voices negative? What percentage of the time are they negative? And then they ask themselves the question, why are they consistently negative? Why, if they are hallucinations, why aren't they random like all other hallucinations? Why are they consistently negative? The next question behind that would be, what holds them on that consistently negative pattern? It's right there in front of their freaking eyes. And here they're talking, oh yeah, Marzinsky doesn't provide any double-blind experiments and clinical research with peer reviews, that kind of stuff. There's not a lot of peer reviews out here. There's people like you who've experienced some of this stuff. You can see it. But this is a totally different realm than what they function in. They function in physical reality. Everything's chemicals. It's bodily stuff. It's all physical stuff. Schizophrenia is not a physical illness. It's a spiritual illness. They don't function, psychiatry and the psychiatric mafia, they don't function in the spiritual area. Neither do psychologists. The whole time, how much I spent 8 years in higher education, undergraduate, master's levels, PhD level. Not once did they mention spirituality, and we're spiritual beings.
That's right. But you have a proof to back up what you just said. And it was one of the first things I said to you when we met this afternoon. You discovered that by implementing the 23rd Psalm, I think I read it described as the voices would act like worms on a frying pan when the victim began to recite the 23rd Psalm. And you discovered this, and I've got to ask, is this universal?
Yes. Yeah. As far as the 23rd Psalm, now the Muslims, they're much more aware of these things than the Christians are. And they take them much more seriously than the Christians do. It's like 23 times in the Bible, Jesus has cast these things out. I mean, it's very clear. And yet, what the Christian preachers do, they don't talk about these things. They don't bring them up. They don't know anything about them. And it's not Jesus and God that are causing these problems. It's these things. It's these entities. It's these archons.
Have you ever heard of an egregore?
I've heard of it. I don't remember what it was.
Jason and I are doing research where we're going to go down a road, and this old so-so thing they put on HBO before COVID is called American Gods. It's drawn from another writing, but I guess the HBO version veers away from it. But when Jason and I cover this, I'm going to bring up the idea of egregores big time. But I would suggest to you, and I'll email you a pamphlet that was given me yesterday on egregores, because as I read some of the things that you've laid down, that immediately came to my mind. And I also wanted to ask, is the negativity seem to be headed towards intended death?
Yes, it is. And once they really got hold of the victim, they start suggesting that, you're no good, you're rotten, nobody likes you, you're isolated, you're no good, you're rotten. Why don't you just kill yourself? Get it over with.
Now that's interesting. Why would they do that if they're feeding off of the victim?
No, that's a good question, isn't it? I didn't know that for a long time. And I had that same question. It's like, why are they killing the source of their energy?
Do you have an explanation for it at this point?
Yes, I did. And it came in from somebody who was listening to one of my podcasts. They said the reason they do that is if the person kills themselves, then the whole family suffers. They'll start blaming themselves. Oh, I should have noticed this. I should have seen this. I should have done something about it. It's my fault. The whole family suffers. So it's not just one person. It's the whole family at that point.
Well, I'm going to send you the booklet on egregores. And I was going to ask you also, have you ever bumped into anything that would have anything to do with the idea of a sacrifice?
Just the Old Testament.
I mean, from the negative voices.
With them requesting a sacrifice?
Or anything to do with the sacrifice?
No. Matter of fact, now that you mention, no. I've never heard them say that they needed a sacrifice for anything. It was never mentioned.
I guess I would offer up the idea that the death of the victim itself could be taken as a sacrifice as well.
Or self-harm, right?
Yeah, or self-harm. They're constantly preaching self-harm. So, yeah, the anti-religious thing, that came one day when I was talking to one of my schizophrenic clients at the state hospital, and he came in and he reported, the voices attacked me last night, and I started repeating the 23rd Psalm, and he's the one that said that the voices reacted to the 23rd Psalm like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. So I started passing that out, and it was consistent.
Wow.
The voices did not like the 23rd Psalm.
Wow.
For those listening, Psalm 23 is the one that begins with, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want."
Yeah, they became aggravated. They became angry. They reacted negatively to it every friggin' single time.
Wow. Do the Muslims have a version of the 23rd Psalm that they use?
Yeah, they do. They have special prayers for these things. They're well aware of them. They're much more aware of them than we are. They're called the jinn, in their opinion.
So Muslims still suffered from it. They just had ways of dealing with it more so than the Christian side of things.
Yeah, their religion takes these things into account, and their prayers take these things into account. They call it what is it? The one who whispers in your ear. And Swedenborg, mystic, he actually said, yeah, just like the cartoons, you have angels, positive angels, and you have demonic entities assigned to you. And he said there's two each, two angels, two demons, and they're constantly talking to you, putting thoughts in your mind. And that's what these entities do. They will slip a thought into your thought stream. And what's so interesting about it is that it sounds just like, for the most part, not always, but for the most part, it sounds just like the thousands of thoughts that go through your mind on a given day. There's no, where are the voices? They don't sound any different. They sound just like all the other thoughts that come through your mind on a different day. But there was one time, this was at the state hospital, I was wondering what these things sounded like. So I prayed. I said, Lord, I'd like to experience what these things sound like. Let me know. I think I only did it once. And like 2 weeks later, something happened. It was like, I lived on a lake back then, Lake Sinclair in Georgia. I had a place right on the lake. And after work, I would go swimming. I love swimming. I love the water. I was already a certified scuba diver. I'd spent a lot of time in and under the water. So at about sunset, maybe an hour before sunset or close to it, I would start heading out into the lake because the number of motorboats on the lake was much less. So my chance of being run over was much less. So I headed out to the lake and I started swimming, and I hit a pace that was almost like a meditation. I was a very good swimmer back then, and I had a good endurance. So I hit the sweet spot between how much energy I was putting out and how much air I was taking in. And the water that day, it was just like a mirrored surface. I mean, it was just like a mirror. And I was cutting through that lake for, just going and going and going. It's like a meditation until I started getting tired. And then I went, well, where am I? How far out am I? And I look up and I'm way far from the shore. And it's dusk. I'm like thinking, yeah, I'm far from the shore. I'm going to have to rest up. And so, it didn't concern me at all. They taught us in scuba diving this survival float where you put your hands behind your back and you float like a dead man. You don't even have to put your hands back there. You just take a big deep breath, float like a dead man. When you run out of air, you whip your head up and you blow all that air out. And as soon as you do that, you start sinking. And then you need to take in another full breath of air before your face goes underwater. And then you keep sinking for another 2 to 3 feet before you pop back up again and start floating like a dead man again. It takes very little energy. All you got to do is move your head up and down once. That's it. Minimal energy. So it's a good way to rest, but your face and your head are underwater while you're doing that. So the first time I came up for air after doing that, I hear this voice in my head. It sounded like one of my own thoughts. It said, well, you're too far from the shore to make it back. And I go, yeah, I know that, fine. It was after the first time I came up. So I took a breath. I sunk after the first one, and I'm heading for the bottom. And then I floated back up again. So it goes, you're too far to make it back you're too tired to make it back to the shore right now. And that was true. Second thing it says is the sun's going down, and any boats on the lake won't be able to see you. And the lights on the shore are going out, or will go out, and you won't be able to see the shore. You're going to get disoriented and won't be able to find the shore. That was a weak argument on its point. And then said you were heading for the bottom and you're going to drown. I'm like, what the hell is that? That was the last thing on my mind. I had no concerns about drowning at all, even though I was too tired to make it back to the shore. It just wasn't a concern. I didn't even think about it. That wasn't my thought. And I'm like, what was that? Where did that come from? And it sounded just like the thousands of other thoughts that go through my head. But I realized after one or two times of this that it was a psychological yes set. It's the same thing that a salesman does to you. When you're selling a vacuum cleaner, it's like, oh, this is a really cool looking vacuum cleaner, ain't it? Yeah, it is. It does a really good job, doesn't it? Yeah, it sure does. It does all these things that these other vacuum cleaners don't do, doesn't it? Yeah. Well, you'd like to buy it, wouldn't you? So they got this yes set running. So I realized after the second time I went up and down the breaths that this thing was running a yes set on me. And I'm kind of going, would I run a yes set on myself to convince myself that I was in trouble or that I was drowning? It's like, no, I wouldn't do that. And so this thing kept coming, so every time I would sink down before I pop back up again, it would repeat the same thing over and over again. It'd go, you're tired. You're too tired to make it to the shore. The lights are going out. It's getting dark. You're heading for the bottom. You were heading for the bottom and you're going to drown.
Did you confront it?
No, I didn't know it wasn't. I didn't know what it was. I didn't figure out what it was until a long time later. It was them, because those thoughts did not come from me. So I was going, what the hell is this thing? What is going on? Well, I wouldn't do that to myself. I'm not worried about drowning. I'm not worried about heading for the bottom. I'm not worried about any of this stuff that a normal person would be, even it getting dark. It was of no real concern to me. So that didn't make sense. So what happens is on the third time that I was heading down after I took the breath, instead of popping back up again, I just let out more air. Like I'm going to spite it. Whatever it is, I'm going to spite it. So I let out more air and I started sinking toward the bottom. It's like dark now. It's close to dark. It's sunset. And I started sinking a lot quicker than I thought I should be. And this was kind of freaky. So when I realized I'm sinking that quick, I shot toward the surface again. And even before I got there, I knew what was causing that. It was the crush depth. It's when you hit a certain depth, your lungs the pressure of the water kind of shrinks your lungs. And you're not as buoyant as you were at the surface. So you sink quicker. So even before I hit the surface, I knew what it was. So I get to the surface and here this thing comes again. The lights are going out. You might not find your way back to shore. You're too tired to get there now. You're sinking for the bottom and now you're panicking. And I'm going, what the hell is this thing? I knew it wasn't me, but I didn't know what it was. So I went, okay. Fourth time I went down, I let out the air. I started sinking toward the bottom. I equalized the pressure in my ears. I'm dropping toward the bottom. It's pitch black down there. So sinking toward the bottom. And then I feel this cold something coming up my legs. I mean, it was a noticeable difference in temperature change. And I went, whoa, and I shot for the surface again. Before I ever got there, I knew what it was. It was the thermocline. It's usually a layer of cold water that lays on top of down at the bottom of the lake or ocean or wherever you are. And it's heavier than the warm water, and it sinks down and it stays there. Well known, it's called the thermocline. Even before I got to the top, to the surface again, I knew what it was. But when I broke the surface, here's this thing again. Hey, you're too tired to make it to the shore. It's getting dark. And now you're panicking. Like, I'm not panicking. And then it adds, and you're going to drown. And I'm like, what the hell is this thing? And it was persistent. So I go down again, let out the air, sink down through the thermocline. And that thermocline wasn't at the bottom yet. So there was probably another 10 feet before it would hit the bottom. So I sunk down through that cold thermocline, and then I felt this icky something kind of sucking onto my ankles. And I'm like, this was freaking me out. This whole process was freaking me out. So I shot to the top again, and here it comes again. You're too far from the shore. You're too tired to make it back. It's getting dark. The lights are going to start going out on the cabins. And da-da-da-da-da. And this time, instead of saying you're going to drown, it says there's a motorboat coming right at you, and it's going to hit you and grind you to pieces. And I'm thinking, well, I've had to dive below motorboats before. I can, if I need to, I can dive below the motorboat, and I can stay there long enough for it to pass over. So I didn't like the option, but I could do it. I knew I could do it if I had to.
Was there a boat coming?
Yes, there was. And what surprised me is you can usually hear sound underwater.
A lot further away.
And I didn't hear that, or I was so taken up by what was going on that I wasn't paying attention. But when I got there, when I got to the surface, I looked around, and there was a motorboat with a green navigation light in the distance heading right toward me. And here's this thing saying they can't see you, which was true. They're not going to be able to spot you. And it says that boat's going to hit you and grind you to pieces. And I'm thinking, I could deal with this if I needed to, but I better keep my eye on it. So I'm watching this motorboat coming toward me and getting ready to dive if I needed to. It was moving so fast that if I was going to move, I wouldn't even know what directions to move at. It was moving pretty quick. I'm tracking this thing, and it goes by me. It's maybe 30 feet away, 40 feet away. And I watch it as it goes past, and I'm watching it disappear past me, and I'm not paying attention to the wake. So the wake ran over me. It went over me while I was taking a breath in. So my mouth got full of water as I was I was breathing in. I didn't pay attention to the wake. So I spit out the water and started coughing. This thing came right back. You're too far from the shore. You're too tired to make it. You're drowning. You're heading for the bottom. What the hell is this thing? So I spit all the water out. I hyperventilated a few times to get enough air to sink down. I knew where the bottom was. It must have been about 35 feet or something like that, 35 feet down. I sink down to the bottom of the lake again. My feet stick in the mud, and it was warm. So the water down there was warm. The mud, there was no feeling to it once I stopped moving. The water was bathwater warm down there below the thermocline. There was no sight. There was no sound. There was no feeling because the water was just bath warm. So all my senses were shut off. And for maybe 15, 20 seconds, the only thing there was I was aware that I was aware. And I'm sitting there with my feet stuck in the mud, on the bottom like a dead guy. It would have been the same way if I were dead. My hands were floating probably 6 inches above the bottom. My feet were stuck in that ooze, that mud. So I had no physical input whatsoever. Everything was shut down, and it was dark down there. So all that was there was my awareness. And I could hold my breath probably for another 20 seconds during that time. And it was like a peak experience. And when I got to the surface, it was like, so that's what's there beyond all the physical senses and all the input that's coming in, all the light and sound and the noise and the feelings and the mishmash of all the input that you get when you're on the surface. That's what's there. That's the core. That's the core of you. And I went, wow, that was incredible.
So at what point did you make your way back?
Oh, I started swimming back after that experience. After the motorboat went by, after I got up from the bottom at that point, after I had this experience, I got back up and slowly swam back to the shore with no big deal. The thing was gone. Wasn't around anymore.
I guess no purchase.
It wasn't there. Yeah. So that's what these things are like. They sound like
Us.
us. It sounds just like the thousands of other thoughts that you have going through your mind on a given day. But the content and the intent are very different. So Magnus Swedenborg, a Christian mystic who lived some 300 years ago, he was the chief mining engineer for the Queen of Sweden at the time. He's one of the top scientists of his day. He invented all this stuff. I mean, he was like the Leonardo da Vinci of his day. And at the age of 50, he was told by Jesus, he said, stop all this stuff. I'm going to give you access to heaven and hell. And I want you to go there and interview the people in heaven and hell and come back and write about it. So his name was Emanuel Swedenborg. So I was into his writings because what he was describing as far as these entities was exactly the patterns that I was seeing. I mean, they matched exactly when he was talking about demons. They matched exactly what these voices were. So once again, these entities, they can put thoughts into your thought stream that don't belong to you.
While being aware of basically your whole history.
Yes, they have access to your entire history. They can bring up every rotten thing you've ever done and they can rub it in your face until they turn your emotional state negative.
Which lowers your vibration.
And at that point, they feed off of that negative emotional energy. That is their food. So with schizophrenics, that's a smorgasbord because they're constantly hearing negative voices in their head telling them, you're no good, you're rotten, you're stupid, you're ugly, nobody likes you, you're worthless, you're useless, or every rotten thing that you can think of, they're telling these people.
Is there anything universal about people who suffer from schizophrenia that is making them more susceptible to the voices?
Yeah, I was going to ask the same thing. How do they pick it up?
Yes, trauma is one of the biggest. Very few schizophrenics who have not been severely sexually, emotionally, or physically traumatized. So trauma does something that breaks your spiritual protection. And there's virtually a one-to-one correspondence between trauma and schizophrenia. Of course, the psychiatric mafia won't look at that because they don't talk to people. They go, oh yeah, what's going on with you? Well, I'm depressed. And they give you an antidepressant. For the most part, especially in the institutions, they don't spend any time talking to you, trying to find out who the person was or what happened to them. They're just drugging these people like a production line.
That's what it is. They make money.
Nobody's getting any better.
I got to ask you, or I can't remember his name. Are you familiar with the guy who did the study where he put forward that nearly 100% of drug addiction and alcoholism is connected to basically what we're talking about? He called it the other. Actually, for everyone listening, this is why Jason and I did the episode on Revolver, the movie Revolver. And even though the movie was violent beyond what I usually put up with, what's being covered there relates almost one-to-one. It's not schizophrenia, but nonetheless, it parallels what we're talking about here one-to-one. And I would point your attention to two things about the coverage of the movie Revolver. It was episode 602. The first thing is when Jake has his episode in the elevator where he finally declares, I can hear you. Up to that point, the voice had been his best friend because it was him talking to himself. The second thing, which is a little closer to the real world, I will point you to, is there are two versions of the movie Revolver, and the run times are different. The version that ran in Europe is longer. The reason for that is because psychologists and psychiatrists are very famous, have this long part at the end of the movie where they talk about the other. They quote people like Julius Caesar. But, and here's where the rubber meets the road, in the same way Jerry has been censored, which tells me there's someone somewhere who knows exactly what we're talking about, they clipped all of those interviews with the psychologists and psychiatrists for the American version. They did not want the American market to hear about the other. But I don't want to lead us too far off track. Jason, I know we're getting close to the top of the hour. Can you think of anything we really want to get in before we got a break for the first hour?
So was it all the way back in the 70s? I remember I've heard some of your other interviews. There was one woman that you started figuring all this out with. So did that start all the way back in the 70s?
Yeah, I started figuring this out when I was working at the state hospital. And I started asking these patients, the schizophrenics, what the voices were telling them. Once I figured out I had enough information to give them that showed them that, hey, I'm serious about wanting to know about these things. I tell them I know this and I know this and I know this and I know this. What else can you tell me? And I found out that with each one, they would add a little bit more information. And the more information I had that I could tell them that psychiatrists and other psychologists they didn't know, they would go, oh, hey, this guy really is serious. He wants to figure out what's going on. And they did too, because a lot of them were confused about what was going on with them. It didn't make any sense to them. So they wanted to know as bad as I did. So I would start asking them questions about the voices. And they were negative. They were anti-religious. These patterns started coming out. And then one day, one of the patients I was asking questions to, his voices got upset that I was asking these kind of questions. So he went to one of the psychiatrists in the unit. He said, hey, this guy's asking me questions about the voices, and I don't like it. It's really upsetting me. The next morning, I got called to the psychiatrist's office, and he closed the door and he said, stop asking these patients about these voices. They're hallucinations. By asking them questions about the voices, you're reinforcing them, and you're making the patient worse. He said, they're hallucinations and you're reinforcing the hallucinations. Stop it. And if you don't, we're going to take action against you. That happened twice at the state hospital. They didn't even want me looking into it, let alone being interested themselves. They were blocking it.
You think that guy was hearing voices?
Well, he might have been. So I learned at that point that I better keep a real low profile. I had to move at a relative snail's pace while I was at the state hospital.
Did you ever get the idea that any of the schizophrenics were hearing the same voice or voices? Like, did you ever get the idea that there were the same entities communicating with the various patients?
The voices in different patients' heads? You mean like two patients who are hearing voices? Were the voices talking to one another between the patients? Is that your question?
Anything to indicate that the same entities were speaking to more than one person?
No. Matter of fact, it was the opposite. They would never speak to entities in another person. Now, if there were several entities in one person, they would get together. Like a woman I was working with last night who's in Greece, the voices, what MACE does, the MACE energy method, this cutting edge psychotherapy that I mentioned earlier, it's an energetic psychotherapy. It works with energy. The voices didn't like reducing the amount of negative energy in this patient that I was dealing with. And they got furious. When we got it down to a certain amount of energy, they got furious. And I could feel them hit me through the friggin' computer. And it was this icky electrical feeling that I can't hear them, I can't see them, but I can feel them. And that feeling is unique to the entities being pissed off. Now, on her end, in Greece, half the world away, all of a sudden the room got freezing cold and she had to go put on a jacket. And they were telling her, if you keep this up, you're going to pay. So they wanted her to break off the contact with me.
Well, that cold thing, that's a very common, I used to go ghost hunting actually. Coldness, unexplained coldness, and it'll almost have like an eerie feel. It's not like you're standing in front of an air conditioner that's on too high.
Yeah.
It's a very common thing that happens, especially with negative entities, that the room or the area will drop, usually substantially if the thing has some juice to it.
Well, they were pissed off. They were saying to the patient, they said, you'll pay for this. You'll pay for this. They said they couldn't get me. I felt them, but they couldn't get me like they were getting her. The energy was being reduced. The amount of negative energy was able to remove that. Now, we couldn't get rid of the voices, but they had much less energy to work with. on two occasions, one with me and one with another MACE practitioner, where the voices were begging for energy after we were done working with the patient. We got rid of a lot of the negative energy, a lot of the trauma. So that's one thing that's it's great with MACE. It's a cutting edge psychoenergetic therapy. It works better than any other psychotherapy I've ever seen. Within an hour, it can get rid of traumas that were just ingrained for decades.
Is it working with frequency or vibration?
Well, it's working with energy. So what it does is what happens in a trauma is there's a real bad feeling and a decision you make with regard to what relationship you have with that trauma. And that negative feeling from the trauma just stays there and torments you forever until the ego shows up and it goes, hey, you're not doing real good with this. It's interfering with your functioning. Let me handle this. So it takes it throws it into the subconscious and it locks it down. From that point on, it takes energy to keep it confined there. And what happens is that anytime from that point on, anytime that somebody who is similar to the person who caused that trauma shows up in your psychological field, that thing goes off like a landmine. So it's like when people say pushing your buttons, that's what it is. It's this body of negative energy that's sitting there in the subconscious, confined, but it's not dead. So if anybody similar to that person that caused that trauma shows up, that thing goes off and it says attack that person or run from that person or avoid that person. So it's like the person you hate that keeps coming into your purview over and over and over again. You could go from here to China and somebody like that person you hate will show up who's Chinese. So not only does that thing seem to attract these kind of people, since it's not dead, it interferes with your psychological functioning. Okay? So it's similar to a computer virus that is affecting your computer where you can't see the virus, but you can see the effects. So the effects of this negative, what MACE calls it, is a negative identity, this big pocket of negative energy that just sits there and it becomes subconscious at that point. So the person, the victim, can't read it, but it's affecting what they do, what they think, what they say, what they don't say, how they act, their feelings. It's affecting them behind the scenes. It's like a mind virus, but it's a program that was put into them due to that trauma and the ego throwing it into the subconscious. So it's like a mind virus. And what MACE does is similar to if you ever had a battery go dead on your car. Once you let that battery go totally dead, it's worthless. You can get a brand new car battery, charge it up full, and if you drain it down to nothing, you can't charge it again. It's a boat anchor. It's worthless. It won't recharge. Well, that's the same thing with these negative identities. They are programs that are in the subconscious that MACE has a way to find. And then what it does is it goes in there and John Mace, who came up with this, the guy was a genius. I mean, he wasn't a psychiatrist or a psychologist. He was a freighter captain. He drove these big freighters back and forth across the ocean all the time. He was a harbor pilot. He had to know about all these different kinds of energy that you have to know being the captain of a ship. Electrical energy, how it flows, the energy of the tides, the currents, the ship. I mean, this whole thing was different kinds of energy all working together to get that cargo to where it needed to go. And he discovered that negative energy flows toward positive energy. So the same thing in a negative flows toward positive. So even in a battery, it's the negative will flow toward the positive in that loop. So this energy trapped in the subconscious is negative energy. And what MACE does, and this is the only psychotherapy that I've ever heard of that uses the spirit to remove this negative energy. So it's not the therapist who removes that negative identity, that negative energy. The therapist creates a bridge to the person's spirit, which is positive energy. And once that bridge is made, it's the spirit will then drain that negative identity. And one of the most common ones is something happened to the person while they were, when they were 7 years old, their mom said something or did something or hit them or something, that they decided they were worthless because of that. And they have drugged that through their entire life up to the point where I'm meeting with. Here's this subconscious feeling that I'm worthless, I'm not good enough. And it affects their entire life. And it's really sad to see that because it can be gotten rid of in less than an hour. Gone, totally gone.
So, Jerry, I've got to interrupt. We've got a break for the top of the hour, so please hold that thought. We can complete it on the other side. Can you please tell folks one more time where they can find your website?
Okay, you can find me at jerrymarzinsky.com, and there's more information about the MACE energy method there. That's energetic psychotherapy available there.
Okay, Jerry, check your inbox. I sent you that thing on egregores. You can take a look. I think there's an interesting possible parallel. Jason, anything more you'd like to add before I wrap hour one?
Well, when we get back, if you could address this, please, I'd love to know if there is a commonality between all of the schizophrenics that you've found that might have something to do with what they're being afflicted with.
All right, I wrote it down. We'll open up with Jason's question about universal cause. That's the end of hour one. Hour one is free to everybody at crow777radio.com. That is CRROW777radio.com. Members know to log in for the full episode. Members get access to all the forums and comment sections. They get access to the solar footage that I've done in member solar videos and the search for the so-called second sun. They get free access to Shoot the Moon, which is a 2-hour film that has 10 awards in the world now, covering my older telescope, primarily on the daytime sky and the moon. And lastly, when you become a new member now, you get to choose free solar images you can print. Many of them print up to 50 inches if you want to go that big. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back for hour two. We have a ton more to cover, and I'd like to wish you all a happy, healthy, and higher-minded new era.